Well, hello everybody. Um, just decided to come back on here today after waking up this morning and just reflecting that it's VE Day today. And although we're having a very low-key celebration, I've been thinking about what it was like for me when I was a child, whenever it was VE Day, because I stayed with my grandparents a lot because my parents divorced when I was quite young. And that was quite radical back in the 60s. So I would spend a lot of weekends with my grandparents, and my grandfather had been affected very badly by the war. He had quite a lot of injuries from shrapnel wounds in his legs that caused him a lot of pain. And I remember as vividly as anything the great big VE Day certificate that he had framed on the wall in their house. And he didn't talk much about the war, but he had this certificate, which was Pride of Pace, in their dining room. And, you know, they had a really hard life. And I just remember how proud he was of that. So I was kind of like that post-war baby generation where there was a great atmosphere of hope. And I just remember what it was like. You know, it's easy for us to sort of not remember what our ancestors went through. But as I was reflecting today about VE Day, I was thinking that means victory in Europe and how we've enjoyed peace in Europe ever since the war. But it could have been so different. And just rewind a bit to, well, we're celebrating 75 years, so it would be the 8th of May, 1945. But if you rewind back to May 1940, things looked very different because we were getting our troops out of Dunkirk. It was Operation Dynamo, as I remember it. And Winston Churchill was not very popular and was actually a voice of dissent against most of his cabinet that wanted to appease Hitler. And he did this amazing speech, which I think was God-inspired, and it was the speech of a champion and not an appeaser. And if he hadn't have made that speech and turned the atmosphere around from one of appeasement to one of resistance, the outcome could have been very different. So I just wanted to read this speech out to you because I just sensed the glory all over it when I found it this morning, and I just thought I'd write it out for you and read it to you, what he actually said. And this is what he said to his cabinet, facing much resistance. He said, "I have thought carefully in these last few days whether it was part of my duty to consider entering into negotiations with that man, Hitler. But it was idle to think that if we tried to make peace now, we should get better terms from Germany than if we went on and fought it out. The Germans would demand our fleet. That would be called disarmament, our naval bases and much else. We should become a slave state, though a British government, which would be Hitler's puppet, would be set up under Mosley, that's a British fascist, or some other person. And where should we be at the end of all that? On the other side, we had immense reserves and advantages, and I am convinced that every one of you would rise up and tear me down firmly from my place if I were for one moment to contemplate parley or surrender. Therefore we shall go on, and we shall fight it out, here or elsewhere. And if this Long Island story of ours is to end at last, let it end only when each one of us lies choking in his own blood upon the ground." What an awesome speech. And at that speech, he had the whole of his war cabinet firmly behind him. So what they choose today to do was to take a risk rather than to appease. And how differently could it have turned out? And as I read that speech, I felt quite emotional when he was talking about lying on the ground with their own blood upon the ground. And that made me think of the kingdom of heaven. So many parallels to that about being in the kingdom of heaven, or the kingdom of heaven in us. And then I thought about what Jesus said in Matthew 11:11. He said, "Truly I tell you, amongst those born of women, there has not risen anyone greater than John the Baptist. Yet whoever is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he." So, just let that sink deep into you. What Jesus is saying here is that John the Baptist is greater even than Moses, Elijah, Noah, and Enoch. So, that means that you and I, who are the least of these he's talking about, are greater even than Moses, Elijah, Noah, and Enoch. So we are champions as well. Winston Churchill was a champion and had instinctive courage and boldness. And I believe that good leaders, champions, and influencers are risk takers and choose discomfort and lean into risk. So my challenge to you today is, will you be a risk taker? And if you want to be a risk taker and step up to your destiny and everything that Jesus purchased for you, say this after me: I will be a risk taker. In that risk, you have left a gap for God. You will feel more alive than you ever had. Come alive. Come alive today. I will choose uncomfortableness over comfort. I'm going to say a dangerous prayer with you. Strip from me what works, that which is good, lest I settle for the good and don't aspire to the perfect will of God. You are a champion. Electric shock the negativity and lies that have been spoken over you. Every time that you've been dumbed down, where you failed before, and that has held you back, I'm just saying to you today, God is giving you permission today. He is saying afresh to you that you are a champion. And as we face this invisible battle against this virus, we can't see our enemy like Winston Churchill could see Hitler. But the same rules apply. As he stepped out to stand up to his enemies, took a risk, and showed himself to be a mighty leader and a champion. The same virtue that was on the inside of Winston Churchill, the same champion quality is inside you. And you can stand up and refuse to accept defeat. So come alive today. Take a risk. You have permission. I hope that's spoken into your hearts today.